Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for attending today's webinar session titled Contact Center Industry Insights by Deloitte. Today you'll have myself and Derek Fitzgerald to present, and really excited to share some of the insights that are contained in the presentation. But to start, we're here to talk about the global perspectives of leadership in the contact center industry. And to give a little bit of background, Derek had approached me about 3 months ago or 4 months ago, sharing that Deloitte is regularly interviewing and surveying contact center leaders across the globe, trying to understand what trends are impacting contact centers today and where do we see contact centers going in the future. This is a topic personally that's near and dear to my heart. So when Derek offered to take us all through this, we thought this would be an amazing opportunity to start to learn some of the things that Deloitte are seeing and then engage in a meaningful discussion with you all as well. So I guess just to start, I'll do a little bit of an introduction in terms of who I am. My name is Nygel Weishar. Pleasure to meet you all. Oh,
that's
apologies.
Fine. That's me.
My name is Nygel Weishar. It is a pleasure to meet you all. I work at CI Financial as the Director of Service Enablement. I've spent about, I'll say, over 10 years now working in contact center industry, primarily focused on transformation, digital initiatives, and really pushing the contact center's bounds in terms of what we traditionally thought they would do. At CI Financial, we are a global asset management company. You may have heard of us in terms of whether you might own some of our mutual funds or have an advisor through the Asante management side of our business as well. Very excited to share with you some of the insights that we've gleaned. And one thing I'll call out really quickly is if you do have anything to share in terms of comments, feedback, questions throughout the presentation, please do use the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on it myself while we're going through. And would love to take any questions, comments as we go. I'll pass it back to Derek now, and then we'll get right into it.
Excellent. Thanks, Nygel. Hi, everyone. Nice to be able to chat with you today. Just a little bit about myself. I've basically been working in contact center service delivery my entire career. Been quite fortunate to work and lead my own contact centers with IBM and been with Deloitte now for 10 years, helping to work with clients like yourself on modernization and transformation type work. And within Deloitte, we have a service strategy and an operations practice that's focused on all about that, helping clients kind of take their contact centers to the next level. One piece of that is we like to obviously understand what are the trends going on in industry. So we have a biannual global survey that we go out and we ask leaders a bit about what they're planning to do, what are their current struggles. So it gives us a broader insight base that we can bring to clients and tell a bit about, obviously what others are doing, and then helping people through like what their current strategy should be. So we're excited to be here, and we'll take you through that. I did a reorder, so let's do that. I know Nygel mentioned, please use the chat. It's open. Doesn't have to be a stale meeting. If you have a comment you'd like to make or on one of the slides or question, we'll try to monitor that. So obviously mine is hello from Deloitte in New Brunswick. If you'd like to say hello, please do. Love to hear from you. And let's get into the conversation. So what you'll see here, the way we start our conversation is just about the landscape itself. As I mentioned at Deloitte in our service practice, we work with a lot of clients around, various stages of transformation. We know, and I imagine you also know, is that the way we work has transformed faster than ever. Most organizations are really not future ready yet. So trying to stay ahead of the disruption, organizations are really looking for ways that they can ensure that they're positioning to thrive for the future. We know the way customers interact with us and with organizations has changed. Traditional customer service models are now being shaken up and disrupted and changing as well. And a lot of companies are placing higher value on what we call that earning that customer trust. So the bottom line of all that equation really is that the contact centers have really become a vital channel or a strategic asset or even a competitive advantage for a lot of leading organizations. And they're looking to understand where they should be making investments, whether that's through their people, through process, or even technology.
Gone from a cost center or people sitting in a back room to becoming one of the front and center places where we drive experience.
It really is. I mean, being in the industry for so long, I mean, sometimes we found that contact centers were never really had the seat at the C-suite table. That's completely flipped on its head because it's such an important area where we can strengthen customer relationships and drive that brand through the customer interactions. Here's one piece. We don't have to do this. I know, Nigel, you probably have gone through that, but we like to start some of our sessions when we're doing work with clients, just about thinking about the future, right? What's your service organization planning to do to thrive, right? Thinking about that strategy, that vision. What's my current state maturity look like today? What capabilities do we need to be successful for tomorrow? And thinking through what a headline might look like. And this is really all about just getting a bit of a mind shift from our regular day-to-day being reactive to for our operations and getting time to think about the future.
I'd be interested if anyone's willing to put yours in the chat. I'd love to see what your aspirational headline would be. It's a really interesting exercise in terms of where it takes your mind. I'll read mine really quickly because I had a chance to prepare in advance. CI Financial's seamless multi-channel offering saves significant capital while becoming a main source of revenue. So I'm looking for the cornucopia of contact centers, hyper efficient, and also one that we see as driving strategic business imperatives.
I love that. Yeah, so we can get into kind of areas where you're looking at costs and savings and opportunities, but also driving new revenue and growth to your business. So that's good. So anytime throughout the chat, you've got a good one, you let us know. We'd love to hear it. But this is just something to kind of get you in the space. And it's also a good primer when we think about what we went and asked leaders to respond to when we talked about the survey. You know, in the recent global survey, we asked them to think about, you know, their current state of their business and what are their plans for their future. What areas are you looking to invest in within, say, the next couple of years? And how are you measuring that success through business outcomes, as well as what are some of your thoughts on the hybrid workplace and how that's changed? So we'll take you through some of the excerpts of the data that we've been able to capture, and hopefully you'll be pleased with what you see. Maybe you'll see yourself in some of these numbers. A little bit about the survey, just quick preamble. This is covered over 135 centers across the globe, 14 countries, 9 industries. This is, I think, our 5th publication since we've been doing this every couple years. So a lot of interesting findings that we'll get into. So the first thing we've talked to is around technology investments and what people are looking at here. This first question, it may seem like an easy or obvious question to ask. You know, how do you feel that, what kind of impact technology has been having on your customer experience or your employee satisfaction? Majority of people understand that there's a significant impact or important impact on both the customer experience and employee satisfaction. So probably not any real surprises there. When we play that against how ready are you for change and transformation, we see that while some are actually moving ahead and making transformational change, nearly a third of organizations are just not ready yet to make investments operationally or in technology. They need more help to think through you know, understanding their current capability gaps they may have, understanding what their business needs are going to be for the future, helping to build what we call that business case for change. And we often work with clients to help them think through those stages to come up with a bit of an assessment or capability maturity model and strategy to think through what those capabilities could look like and should look like to help either make the requests for the capital and the finances that you might need to make investments.
My mind initially when I read this slide was going to the people readiness, and something I was going to raise is to say your people are probably more ready than you think, but the parts you highlight, Derek, are crucial. It's that narrative that you start to tell up front and really highlighting where you have opportunities to sort of admit we have a problem or better framed an opportunity, and here's what we think we can do about it. But that first stage, if it's not done properly, it's really going to bootstrap you in terms of where you take your overall transformation journey.
Exactly, I couldn't agree more. So we get a little deeper now in terms of, okay, so now that we know we want to change, what are the capabilities across your company that are you really looking to evolve over the next couple of years? So you'll see some rankings here where people would select kind of the highest to the lowest areas. And, you know, AI, automation, you know, that focus on cost and operational efficiency has been a big proponent of areas that are looking into. Whereas new channels and focusing on maybe new customer experiences and engagement. Knowledge management. How do we encourage greater employee enablement to make our people successful? Data analytics and insights as well is a big area. How do we make sense, or how do I even access some of the data that I need to make decisions about my business? And we know sometimes it's just hard to get at the data because they exist in multiple systems across, you know, various platforms, and bring them all together. So you'll see some interesting perspectives here. Again, some of these will vary based on your maturity level, where you are in your journey, right? If you're really at the grassroots level of transformation, you may be focusing on different areas. But overall, this was the survey results that we were able to capture.
There's no surprises in terms of the categories themselves. It would be the priority order, but as you mentioned, it really comes down to where are you in the journey, and I think you tackle them in sort of a certain sequence to ensure that you're able to keep building. But no, it's a great highlight, and I'm knowing what's coming next. I'm interested in sort of how these insights start to pair with some of the further ones.
Well, that's really it. It's like, so what are you looking to maybe do over the next couple of years? And then specifically of the ones that you have invested in, what kind of rate of return have you seen on some of your investments to date? That's kind of a key question. And while some areas have reported struggling, right, to get those expected returns and benefits, like specifically that you'll see with maybe AI or analytics, not that they're not important, but sometimes they're a bit challenging to do properly. And it may be an internal capability that you need to develop to make them successful. While other areas show stronger rates of return, especially when you'll see like CCaaS modernization, process automation, even focusing on agent coaching, workforce management, knowledge management, we'll start to see the gains there.
Oh, the three on the right stand out to me as some of the biggest changes that we've made in our centers over the last couple of years. Each one of those elements has driven tons of value. So I couldn't agree more. And I would certainly say if you're not doing any of those three, start to think about it. And I pair that with the interesting insight for me is on the left-hand side and it's not to say AI isn't effective. AI is incredibly effective when layered on the right foundation. So I think what it calls out is that maybe trying to do it too soon or racing at it from the get-go might not be the appropriate order depending on your organization's maturity. So it's maybe always ensure that you have a good plan in terms of how you're going to scale up as opposed to just taking the one shiny object at the end.
Excellent. So now even further, are you considering moving your technology to the cloud? Is kind of a general question that we like to ask people. And you'll see here in some on the left-hand side respondents, 32% responded that they're already there, that they're already working on that across multiple initiatives. Another 43% are actually planning to move more of their technology to the cloud within the next couple of years. 25%, however, did note that we don't have any plans to go move our technology to the cloud. And there's been some reasons on the right as to maybe why not, whether it's data concerns or maybe that lack of internal capability that Nygel mentioned, or lack of funding.
Yeah. As somebody who's moved to cloud in the last couple of years, I want to help dispel these myths for folks just because I can't express enough how much value we've gotten out of it. And a lot of these concerns I see as relatively easily overcomable. Bringing in the right partner, although you may not have the internal capabilities, the amount of support these solutions require is far less. So bringing in a partner can actually be fairly cost effective and help you not only from a hands-on keyboards, but also a strategic direction perspective. And we also talked about how the beginning framing of this opportunity and journey is so critically important. And that's really what's going to drive some of that lack of funding and investment part that you see at the bottom. So if anyone does have questions on their journey or impacts they're facing, please do reach out. I'd be happy to talk to them.
Excellent. Thanks, Nygel. You've got a great use case there to talk exactly to that. And then we specifically take that another layer down is what technology are you specifically looking to maybe move to the cloud in the next couple of years? And, we look at this here, we mentioned it before, like the areas that are already in the cloud that people have been really pushing, that CCaaS solution, CRM capability, and the areas that we see where there's more plans to migrate to modernize solutions in those areas of knowledge management, workforce, analytics as well is a piece in there. So we're still continuing to see expected movement on CCaaS and CRM, but then depending on maturity, right now, what else can I continue to elevate and move into? So we're starting to see an uprising in things like knowledge management capability, et cetera.
Certainly. And analytics too, I find, every one of these is critically important. But when you speak to the benefits of really getting into the cloud, find this the scalability of the analytics and that you bring everything into one spot, then analyze versus a bunch of disparate analytics saves a lot of time and also increases the clarity in terms of how your business is operating. But either way, like I say, they're all very important, so it's hard to pick which one you'd do first. And again, back to organizational maturity, where are you at, and which one would make the most sense to come next?
Exactly. So then it's about, well, if you have done this, how's it paid off, right? So some of the investments that people will be able to respond back to, we've got 4 here, 2 on each page, but we think about CRM, and what benefits have you been able to realize through that? Obviously, the benefits include, improved customer sat, reduced handle times, and that's enabled by that greater consolidation of an agent's, facing applications, that desktop complexity, so to speak, or even the ability to greater personalize the interaction. On the knowledge management side, we'll see, key benefits around first contact resolution, reducing training time. This is all about being able to search, access the knowledge that people need, and personalizing the content. So it's making that, it's empowering the agent more to be able to deliver on service.
Found for us some of those benefits, like when in the CRM side, what enabled most of it is we were in an Excel-based tracking mechanism prior to migrating to a cloud-based CRM, and the amount of time and I guess incorrect information that gets captured, or the fact that when you call into a different agent, you don't have the same information, all of those things added up, created a ton of slack in the center, and simply just by having a common repository saved us a ton. But I don't disagree with the benefits above. The only other one I'd call out in regards to knowledge management that we found to be really beneficial is the governance around knowledge management as well. On an antiquated system that lived sort of on one team, it made it really hard to have a spread across the organization to manage your knowledge and ensure it was current and accurate. By putting it in the cloud, it was much easier to share the capabilities of administration with partners that really needed that capability. So it's actually taken the burden off us to keep on top of it. We know that our knowledge is much more accurate and up to date as of now. And further, it's accessible to a much broader audience than simply just some of our internal employees. So it really expands it exponentially in terms of the value there.
No, I think that's an excellent point that you make around just specifically with knowledge management. It's not always just about the technology, because the technology is the enabler. It's also about the way we work and building maybe that what we might call a center of excellence around knowledge. Like, let's understand how we govern knowledge, who creates it and when, and what are the roles that we need to have in place so the whole program itself can be successful. The other two we talked a bit about was voice and text analytics. And I think we see here some of the benefits were around reducing customer churn and agent attrition even, but this is all about getting at those predictive insights to provide you the information you can need, an evidence-based approach to making decisions for your business, as well as being able to automate services, specifically in the areas of like quality and customer satisfaction, quality surveys.
You know me, Derek, I'm big fan of voice and text analytics.
Yes,
I think it's one of those places that you get to similar to AI, where if you've built a really solid foundation, you can set these capabilities up to drive significant value. I think it's the times where you start to feel like you're conducting a bit of magic. The amount of information you can provide, the level of detail, it's eons beyond what you might have had before in terms of your capabilities through manual tracking and reporting, and your ability to pivot on the fly. It's just greatly increased. So anyway, I'm clearly biased, but at the same time, I think, like I say, building the right foundation and getting to here where you have the right team, you have the right data structure, and then you have a vision for the things that you want to capture, bringing those together is secret sauce.
Yeah, I mean, at its core, it's about helping me to get at the data that I need to create insights about my business so I can make what we'll call evidence-based decisions to make changes in my programs or offerings to customers or improvements in agents, et cetera. So about that analytics piece, again, it's not an easy one to do, but there's all kinds of opportunities out there. Nygel, you got great examples. From a CCaaS perspective, I think we talked a bit about that already, but just the benefits around even today with the way that the types of offerings that are available in the market, right? There's greater cost savings. They're quite quick to implement. And this is going to enable you to make changes quickly to your business. And there's a lot of product flexibility out in the market around these areas.
Yeah, from our experience, Derek, I'd say of all the things I've just talked highly of, this would be one of the first I'd recommend looking at if you haven't started here. The flexibility, the scalability, and the speed at which you can work with these solutions, it really sets you up from a strong foundational perspective. And I'd also propose everyone that although it does feel like it's a big undertaking, we didn't begin our CCaaS transformation until a month after the pandemic started, and we were able to get through within, I think it was 7 months or 8 months total for us to get that up and running, and much shorter than you'd expect, and the benefits have been phenomenal.
Yeah, transformation through the pandemic, right? So it's it can be done.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. So that's kind of the oversight around some of the technology investments. And I think we've told a bit of a story about where people are looking to invest and what areas, how have they seen some of the benefits come to life for their business. We're going to pivot now into some operational insights that we've pulled from the survey. First one is just about channel distribution. How does your organization expect it to change over the next few years? And I think, you can probably start to see yourself in some of this data. Phone volume still, is going to be the primary channel, according to many of the people who responded. But there's some expectation that the volumes themselves, that channel distribution might drop. And that's probably in lieu at clients looking to drive more self-service, maybe to deflect call volume where they can for cost savings, with greater self-service automation. Other channels like paper, those more traditional channels, they want to go down, where more digital channels may be starting to see a bit on the rise, whether that's social or text engagement. So, probably intuitively it makes sense for a lot of people who are familiar with their business.
This just reminds me of some of the first slides we saw around technology. It's continuing to drive, and you're seeing the channels become more technologically enabled.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Those volumes per se, we talked a bit about just the change in volume overall. This is some client data that we were able to capture where majority think that they'd like to see they expect to see a slight decrease, and this may be coming from an area where the pandemic really drove volumes up. Maybe it's more of a suspect of normalization, getting back to where we were. But what's interesting is at the right side of the page is the complexity of those calls is expected to increase. And I think we touched on a little bit before was, with a lot of the great work that people are looking to deflect call volume, drive more self-service and automation type work, what we're now left with is maybe we've moved those lower value or lower emotionally type interactions, and now we're left with those more higher emotional value calls that agents need to be able to support. So now that's where we start to see people are positioning, if they've moved through the CCaaS solution, now it's knowledge management and things like that, is how do I make sure that my people have what they need to be able to solve those complex issues? So it's an interesting kind of a play there and a shift.
Highly linked to automation is how I think of it as well, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, and it's two sides of the coin. We want to do both. We want to automate. We want to drive digital transformation where we can, but we also need to think about the human side of the element, right? And it's about how we're enabling our workforce.
Yep, absolutely.
Just kind of a side question we ask people around, just do you support cross-selling, or upselling, right? To sell or not to sell, kind of the question. And the types of interactions that people take, 45% in this survey responded that they're primarily focused on service only. But it's an interesting point to see that a lot of people are starting to create more conversations about how do we bring more of a sales from service conversation into the contact center that maybe wasn't traditionally primarily a revenue generating area in that area to support growth. And again, maturity level will probably help you think through that, right? Let's get our basics done right, but then how do we elevate and move away from that cost center to more of a experience center and potentially revenue generating center?
Exactly. We've taken it from, we've got a few people sitting in a back office room answering phone calls to, this is an experience driver, to this can become an actual revenue source driver at the same time. And I heavily link it to maturity, to your point around maybe what the impetus of the center was to begin with, whether it was a sales center or not. But above and beyond that, I see it as a natural progression, because sales to service, or service to sales rather, is something that I think most of us have come to appreciate as just a natural flow By building trust with an individual through service, it tends to open up more avenues from a sales perspective. So it becomes, once you realize, it becomes a really great opportunity to action. It's obviously not easy. And I think, especially when you're in a heavily rooted service center to begin with, that transition can be certainly cumbersome. And I think what we'll speak to a little bit later in the presentation, just around culture, leadership, and those components are going to be absolutely critical as you're making a transition like that.
That's exactly it. I think we've maybe talked a bit about this already around how's your organization using the voice text analytics piece. And we know that there's an interest for getting at better data and analytics to make decisions. Specifically, respondents came back to say, well, listen, if I'm using it, I want to use it to improve quality, reduce risk, get at basically more broader customer insights, to understand that at a more intimate level than more of the experience-based. I think this is what we're hearing from customers, or maybe a subset of smaller, customer sat surveys. This is really getting at some deeper, more advanced analytics capability where I can have more confidence in the data and drive more improvements across programming. Of course, some here listed that they're not currently using it, and we know that's the case because, again, based on maturity, some people just may not be there yet. But there is certainly a turning point where a lot of people are looking to understand how to take advantage of some of the benefits and outcomes they can get at with voice and text analytics.
Yeah, I see it as a Swiss Army knife. The easy ones are call contact drivers. That's just think of the things you want to know that are coming in, and these tools will give them back to you pretty easily. Expand that to maybe let's track how effective a campaign might be going. Do we have these conversations happening? What are people saying after that we provide them a certain recommendation? Taking that all the way up to, I'm proud to say we're at a point where we've developed a client experience automated evaluation where we provide a monthly scorecard to every single agent within our center that touches on 4 key quadrants and then about 7 or 8 additional KPIs that are pulled in, all focused on the experience relative to their peers. Not to say we still don't do things like surveying and QA, but it's a really, really nice additional layer that helps focus specifically on that vector around what's the experience you're providing and what can you be doing to make it better. So I raise that simply because you might think of this as graphs of, well, we got this many calls about this topic and this many calls about this topic. That's the real basic stuff. And then you can really start to mix and match, if you will, how you pull this data together.
It's a good point about quality, right? And quality monitoring, and I think we all get that. And if you're in a more traditional environment, you're relying on people to go in and listen to calls and evaluate based on a traditional scorecard. And you're getting at what, maybe 3 to 5% if you're lucky, the type of interaction data, versus maybe trying to get at 100%, and your insights will have more confidence that way. So that's kind of exactly what it's all about. We pivot a little bit now around away from technology per se, but it's around what improvements are people looking to make to reduce turnover in their contact center. You'll see a number jumping out on the page, the right-hand side, 19.62. That was the annual average turnover that was reported. I'd be curious to know if people are plus or minus 5 points on this, or way below or way over. Because traditionally, we've seen numbers much higher this in some centers and others that are right around this area. But that's the number, and a lot of the conditions that people are focusing on to help reduce that or make it more stable is in areas around hiring. How do we do hiring now, especially in a remote world, hybrid space? How do we do training and onboarding and sharing, creating knowledge for folks? How do we do coaching better in this environment, and how do we enhance it? Even bonuses and monetary incentives. I remember a conversation a long time ago in my past was, thank yous are great, but nothing says I love you like money. So it's still important aspect of the equation. And I think there's all kinds of things that can attribute to retention and attrition.
Absolutely. Hiring and training has become certainly a pivot throughout the last couple of years, and I can appreciate why it's coming up so high here. And I know for me, the things that resonate are around the coaching element and the career pathing element, because I feel those speak really to the human side, which is stuff that you tend to have a bit more control over outside of financials and other decisions that your business might be making.
Yeah, most people want to feel that they're providing value add work, right, for the business and something they can get behind. And even career pathing in here is always a challenging area for us in centers. how do we create a path that that I can move within the center, and then eventually perhaps move on within the business if that's an area of opportunity. The next piece really speaks to kind of just a layer down from that is we asked leaders about, what factors do you feel contributes most to the morale and attrition of your teams? Positive workplace culture, right? Sounds easy. It's not hard. It's not easy to implement, but it's a very big topic of conversation, and primarily has increased over the last couple of years just because work has changed, right? It's transformed so much in the way that we work, and it's important to understand how do we create that positive workplace culture differently today, because we're not all working together in the same center anymore. And how do I keep people motivated? What are good management practices as well, right? I think we've all probably heard the one about, like your relationship with your manager. Do you feel supported and encouraged? And that's an important factor. Working from home options is third on the list, right? So that people want those flexible workplace options. How do we design our centers for that in a hybrid environment? And again, you'll see some things that would just repeat themselves: training and coaching, right? Obviously, new technology and recruiting, career growth. These are all factors, right? It's not a one of, and it's a very complicated formula, but you'll see some places that have really pushed themselves up in the last couple of years.
Yeah, the two that stand out to me, work from home is interesting. I think it's a big topic. I think that a lot of us are dealing with pretty consistently these days. The thing I note is you have probably one of the biggest low and mediums, but also one of the highest very highs. So what that says to me is there's a pretty big range, I guess, right now in terms of how people feel this is impacting their staff. And I think that's evident just in terms of the variability and that the different ways people are designing their future post-COVID centers. The other one that I highlight, the positive workplace culture one, it's the easiest one to say, the hardest one to do. And it's starting in, so my team knows this, Derek, but there's a few words that I just can't stand. Synergy, agile, and I mean in ways where they're used as the be all end all solution to all of your problems, because oftentimes they just get thrown out there as, that thing. Positive workplace culture, I cannot impress upon you how, if you feel you have challenges on the forefront, positive workplace culture is going to be your buoy to help sort of float you through the storm. But it requires a lot of calories. It requires a lot of consistency and utmost integrity. You can't simply say, I'm going to do a great workplace culture and then it'll happen. It actually has to be something that you want, that you're willing to put the calories into and legitimately care about your teams. But what I will say is, I think by doing that, you also feel the care back, and that's what helps you retain employees, and then further to that, drive really good results with the same number of people that you might have in a bad workplace culture.
Well, I think that's it. I mean, like, culture is a complicated formula. There's so many aspects that we see of it. I mean, even just the fact that, how do we work with each other today? I mean, and we were talking earlier with, with Sangeeta and the work she does with DISC, and just understanding the, each of our kind of our preference and our styles of working. That helps too, because now we're working differently. We're not sitting side by side. Just having a good sense of that is an important area. So people are thinking about that, and it's a topic of interest for sure.
And I'd even add, just really quickly, I'm sorry, but like, think of today in the world. We have some really big events going on in the world that are obviously very sensitive. How many of you have sent out notes to your teams asking how they're doing, making sure that they're supported, that if they have family, they're taking the time to contact? Those little things, not necessarily business related, but ultimately drive your positive workplace culture. And that's why it's sometimes hard for people to, I think, get there, because they're looking for, what can I do within the bounds of my role? Often workplace culture is driven outside of the bounds of your role, I think.
Yeah, I agree. So we'll pivot now. I think this one's about measures that matter, metrics, right? And I think we all know we can overmeasure our business, to the nth degree. What are the right measures? What should we be measuring? Should I be benchmarking myself against others? And we talk to clients about this, and we do a lot of benchmarking work with clients about how they're doing in their performance and how they are comparing to industry. But it's really also a bit about what your internal goals are. What's your own strategy? What does good look like for your organization, and not necessarily comparing yourself to another area unless it's a direct competitor. on certain things. So we saw the lens of measures across these 4 themes: customer experience measures, financial effectiveness measures, operational measures, and employee engagement. So on each one of those, we have a little bit of insights as to what people are measuring most, or at least have ranked these measures as highest in assessing performance in this capability area. So for customer experience, probably no surprise, whether it's an NPS score or customer satisfaction scores, you'll see on the 3rd, and even abandonment rate has showed up as a high one. And that really does speak to, if you think about that, is the experience that the customer has, in waiting. So is the top 3. And then you'll see some traditional ones there, whether it's about speed to answer and service levels, to agent quality scores and first contact resolution. The interesting commentary we hear a lot from clients is our customers don't necessarily mind waiting a little longer, as long as I know that when someone does say hello, they're going to be able to resolve my problem efficiently. So that's a bit of a shift from, because I mean, if you go back 15 years, it was all about speed to answer. And like, let's answer that call as fast as we can. And now it's like, I don't mind waiting a little longer. And there's a sweet spot, right? I think 6 minutes or something like that is about the timeline before it starts impacting customer experience. I think there's math out there. But you think about how do we prioritize our service levels? And it's an interesting topic.
Certainly, and I find we do a lot of B2B at CI, and that 6-minute mark would be deep compared to what we experience in the B2B world, because the expectations are even higher. And you do find that, especially when folks are sitting at a desk waiting for something to continue their job, that becomes a pretty critical factor. And I've liked how this called out. I know personally, I tend to think of client experience measures as surveys, think of them as a bit QA as well, and that's where I sort of gather it. But there are system stats you can also use as leading indicators that will help you understand if they might be contributing to that experience, or if you start to see them tank per se, then you need to be leaning in as well.
Yeah, there's some nuances here I think that we probably want to recognize, right? Obviously, the emotional value of the call. Right. So, if it's like my laptop's broken and I need to have it fixed because I can't do work if I'm in an IT environment, well, the emotional value is high, and I'm going to probably be okay waiting a little longer, but fix it when I get it. Versus like, I need to just make a quick update to my account. Like, I don't want to wait for that. Right. And so you'll see the variances in what really is better. So you have to understand there's context behind that, and even broader, the context with just COVID itself. I think we've seen some empathy from customers that they go, I understand it's crazy busy in the contact centers. I'm a bit empathetic to that. I get it. So my 24-minute wait, okay, but I don't think that's going to last, right? I think that at some point it's going to be like, enough's enough. Let's get back to some sort of sense of pre-COVID normalcy. Again, that's why we kind of say, when we're talking about benchmarking and how I compare to others, it's really about what do you want your customer experience to be in that sense. It's just a point. On the financial side, there's one that sticks out: cost per contact. How do I really get a baseline really of understanding what is my cost per contact? And we've seen many different ways of measuring this, but traditionally it's just the volume to a channel, across my total operating budget. Obviously, I think most clients are trying to drive volume to the lower cost channels where they can, as far left as possible to self-service, to maybe even, like obviously chatbot, and then to actual human interaction through, chat or social, etc. And then kind of all the way right over to like the in-person, if you have an area that's actually like a front counter type of a setting. So cost per contact is a high measure that most people are using today.
Kind of your contact center thermometer when you think of the overall effectiveness. If it's rising, things aren't really going that well. If it's going down, then obviously you're becoming more efficient. And a lot of these metrics, I think, below contribute into it. The learning that I've experienced in this journey to put our cost per contact together is, to your point around the comparability, to try and compare even two doors against one another is really hard, because your businesses are going to be structured different. You're going to have different cost models. Or even access to different costs.
Well, you'll see that here below, right? Like, and even just based on the survey respondents, there is some context that we like to go to, understanding that who were the people that filled out the survey. And we saw earlier, majority were service only oriented people, not sales directives. So you'll see they're lower on the scale. But I bet you for those individual centers, those numbers are probably what's driving up for them. So there's that level of confidence or context that we need to understand is, if I am a revenue generating shop and I do have a sales kind of area as the main focus, then of course that's going to be a high priority for me too. So again, this is a kind of an aggregate view of what we're seeing in the market, but some context needs to be understood just so we don't make, decisions based around it. It's really what's important for you and your organization. All right, what was the next one? Oh yes, operational efficiency measures. I think most of us are familiar with what's down the left-hand side of the page here. The two that kind of stick out are just average handle times, measuring the time it takes to, through an interaction, whether that's talk time or hold time and after call work all added up. And we know there's a point of caution there that where most organizations aren't trying to drive that as a target for agents, because it should be about that one customer at a time perspective. We don't want to necessarily get people off the phone, but we want to find efficiency in that. So if there's outliers and areas where we can try to drive efficiency with our staff, whether it's making sure they have access to the knowledge they need when they need it, it's a good indicator. Same thing with first contact resolution. So now that I'm talking to someone, how effective am I at resolving their issue? So
this one I'd dive into a little bit with you, Derek, just around first contact resolution. And I'll call out, I've posted something in the chat. Selfishly, I would love to know how people are measuring first contact resolution in their centers. I know we're currently doing it via agent reporting, where we get them to manually track if it's been completed on the first contact. But I know that there's different perspectives that you can take. Did the client really feel like you've actually resolved their contact, or did they end up having to call back in a day later because they didn't have complete information? Is there a level of quality assurance that goes in and does sort of a judgment on whether first contact or resolution was achieved? Would love to know perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, FCR, right?
From Rennie, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we're dead.
Okay. Yeah, we can hear you. Oh. We could, but I think it might have been by mistake, so I'll...
Okay, maybe so. Yeah, I think you're right about the FCR piece. It's from whose perspective? Is it from the agent's perspective? And that can be by design, right? My job was to, here was a question and here was an answer, right? But could be more to the journey that from the perspective of the customer, it's different. So like a survey may find that, no, you didn't actually resolve my broader issue. So there is, again, broader context about how do we measure it and the meaningfulness behind it.
You can use it, yeah.
Employee engagement was the fourth piece that we talked about, and ask leaders to kind of comment as, how do you, which metrics are you using that you feel are most important to assessing the performance? Turnover, right, is one. Again, is it, is it turnover that's been initiated by the agent that I'm leaving versus, perhaps decisions that have been made, or the conditions of a contract, et cetera. But understanding turnover and why people do leave is an interesting component in measuring that, because I mean, when you do lose people, you lose knowledge, right? So it's an important indicator that people look at. And then the straight up agent satisfaction survey. I mean, it could be a survey itself and I send it out, or it's, how well as a manager am I having meaningful conversations with my staff? Do I have time that we can set aside each month to have a meaningful conversation? And, in centers where you've got hundreds of employees, are you doing that well, right? And are they meaningful? And it's not necessarily just a quick meeting to say, here's your metrics, but also more of a, how you doing, right? What do you need? So that's a big piece too, is understanding the satisfaction of your employees when it comes to employee engagement.
How to measure, when to measure, those are pretty big, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So lots of good stuff in metrics. Those are some of the highlights. The last section we get into is around working from anywhere. So the whole remote work and hybrid work, and kind of, so we talked a bit about leaders, about what they've experienced in that sense. First big question was just, how did COVID really impact your organization when it comes to working from home? And you all have an opinion on this. Some centers on the far right, you'll see 24% at least reported, they were already working remote. So it wasn't as big as an impact perhaps as others, and they pivoted accordingly. In the middle with 34%, many identified that they were significantly accelerating a work from home program that they already had existing. It just wasn't set up for the magnitude, so they scaled. But 43%, COVID was really a catalyst. for developing a new work from home program and strategy. And, we're still getting our legs around it as well. And then now, what does it look like ongoing in the future? Are we positioning back or some sort of hybrid model? Those were some of the initial insights that we saw. And what were some of the concerns they had at the time with moving to a work from home strategy? So, a lot of leaders identified that they were expecting to see a productivity decrease, or relationships would be disrupted, whether they be internal or client, and even just development and learning. How do we coach and train and continuously focus on development for our staff in a remote work environment? So thus, maybe we'll start to see motivation being decreased, and overall well-being. And I think for a lot of people, we may have seen the actual opposite in some of these cases, where those fears were just initial fears.
I couldn't agree more. This would have been my list point blank back in March 2020. If I had these 5 to rank, I would almost flip it on its head now. Realizing that it's the potentially well-being depending on certain individual situations. If you are living home alone in a pandemic without being able to socialize, those things do, I think, really start to impact. We saw so little impact to productivity. And I think through, as we've kind of talked a couple of times, culture, leadership, I haven't really felt the relationships waning either, but you do feel it on a case-by-case basis, absolutely. And those are the ones that I think you really need to look out for, because they might be a little more silent or quiet than the things you typically might deal with, but ultimately some of the bigger impacting and serious ones.
Exactly. So we took that a little bit later now. It's just, okay, now let's talk about some of the real impacts. Not what did you think, but what are you seeing, right? What have you seen so far to date? The top row really just talks about some of the percentages of working from home or working remotely. Pre-COVID, on average from the respondents was around 20%. And then during COVID, we saw that bump up on average 84, in some cases 100, right? Of course, depending on your scenario. And plans to continue post-COVID showed up at around 63%. But we've known some others that no, we want to go back to more of an at facility model, versus others are on the other end and they're going to want to continue that. The number on the far right speaks to agent preferences to work remote, and they're high. At least what we're seeing in respondent rates here is that 70 plus percentage points, where the agents are actually now at a point where they enjoy that type of work. And there's all kinds of advantages to that, of course. I mean, I get it, maybe from a recruiting perspective, I'm getting greater access to a broader talent pool, right? So I don't have to be close to downtown here, but maybe I'm more rural or something like that, where I might be able to get access to people who are high talent that maybe we weren't considering before. So all those things kind of bring broader context. And I think, Nygel, to your point about the whole agent productivity piece, a high percentage just really came out and said we really didn't see the variance that we expected to see. I think there was an early onset challenge, of course, that moving to home and getting things right. But once we got through that bubble, I think there was a common representation where we're just as productive working remotely.
I think for non-typical work from home users, there's a novelty to it, right? You're in your pajamas, things are a little more lax, and you feel that. And to your point around that first maybe couple of weeks, I think people probably took advantage of it. But I know personally myself, it quickly became a routine where I was going to work and I'm still working the same hours. I'm still doing the same thing. And I think that's personally, at least that's something that I found, is there was no real difference whether I was sitting here or at a different desk. The 2 stats in the top right, I'd call out too, because it's I find it interesting. What it shows is we don't have a good alignment. We have a decent alignment, maybe there's not a perfect alignment between the plans and what the actual preferences are. And I do agree, the pandemic has shifted things. I've meeting with some partners in HR and partners across the industry. You're hearing things like work from home has become a currency, and it's become something that people seek and look for in their roles. So I certainly can understand why you see it as a bit higher. I'd also be interested too, just from our audience's perspective, as to if you are going back in, what were some of the drivers that sort of brought you there, and why you would make those decisions, or why you did make those decisions. Because I think what I want to ensure is that we're always thinking of all perspectives and not just simply taking sort of the majority rules.
Yeah, and then we hear some language where a lot of organizations, and this would maybe go beyond the contact center, but just maybe the general enterprise or the organization itself was thinking about the future of work and workplaces, it's not necessarily, maybe we shouldn't be mandating you have to come back to the office, but maybe encouraging people to come back to the office where it makes sense. Now in contact center, you have to have a little more consistency around that model, but it'd be interesting to hear others' perspectives if there's anything to share, which leads us to kind of the next slide here is also now that we are in a hybrid environment, because not working from home isn't for everyone. We know that the home environment may be just more disruptive than work. I think we can all speak to that. So, we know it's probably not an all or none scenario for everyone, but the actual workplaces, this is like the real estate, like what are we doing with that now? And there's just like 8% the respondents here, at least, yeah, we could probably get rid of that off our balance sheet now. And we know real estate's a huge bottom line on the budget. While others, though, are looking at maybe ways to transform the office. You know what, we're going to keep our real estate, but we're going to be using it differently. I need to use it for recruiting. I need to use it for training. People do need to come to the office to work together. And maybe not everyone gets to work to the office based on performance, who knows, right? So I think people are thinking about what's the hybrid workplace look like for the future. And we've got a whole team within Deloitte that does all that work about hybrid workplace design. And I'm just amazed to hear some of the stuff that they can get into. But you'll see some of the percentages here where people are really kind of focusing on if they're very cost centric or cost driven. The CFO might be going, okay, let's get that off the balance sheet. But then the other conversation is, I think, how do we use the space differently versus reducing the footprint? So that's
you might not have that option. You might be into a lease or something like that.
That's right.
And the other thing too is the commitment you make. You might feel comfortable today, but not be totally confident how things might look in a year from now. So deciding sort of the right way to utilize that space in a valuable way today and keeping some options open might come into play as well.
Exactly. And then I think the last slide on this piece is in the same vein, just what investments are you looking to help increase the effectiveness of your work from home or your work, programs? And 27%, we're not talking about, let's make sure that we have the right tools in place for knowledge sharing and collaboration. 20% are looking to improve, remote training. Like how do we do this well? It's different, but we need to focus on doing that. So let's make our work from home program successful. 16% dual monitors. Yes, please. Like give me a couple screens to work from. If I got my CRM and my knowledge management tool up or whatever it might be. Even video, and I think, Nygel, you can speak to that, but that video engagement is an interesting channel, not just for customers, but just making sure I'm connecting to my work colleagues.
Yeah, no, I just quickly would say it's small. Like I know it's one of many tools that are combined with some sort of IM solutions so that you have quick access to your peers, that you can hop on a video, see them, understand their emotional state. It's those little things that are going to keep you connected for a much longer period of time. And I would just contrast in seeing teams that don't do those things. They are in a much different productivity state, culture state, you name it, very different way of being. And it's simply just by leaning into the tools at your disposal and trying to engage people as humans.
That's it. That takes us to the end. I think we're in good position for timing. I want to thank everyone for joining and listening to Nygel and I talk about this. Of course, I think you can tell we're both passionate about it. So if there's any questions either now or later, feel free to connect anytime. Happy to have a chat about anything that we're seeing across industry, or even help on supporting you with any kind of transformational work that you might need. I'm going to turn it over to you, Nygel. I know that there's, before we end the day, there's some things that are coming up within GTAC that we're looking to promote too.
Thank you very much, sir. Absolutely, and big thank you to those that have put in questions thus far, and just the engagement we've gotten through the chat. I really appreciate it. Do want to call out a few big events that we have coming up through GTAC. The first being our annual Women in Leadership event. This is one that's near and dear to my heart. I know as the other members of our council and GTAC, it's an annual event where we highlight and celebrate the women in our lives and in business. It is a virtual event this year, and as you can see, it's on March 8th at 8:45. Tickets are $75, but there will be some goodies and treats provided, all thanks to Air Miles. The other 2 sessions I did want to highlight, both virtual as well. Design thinking applied in the contact center space will be taking place on March 30th, and also embracing the digital momentum to supercharge the customer experience, taking place April 7th. So pretty much throughout March and then into April. And as you can see on the bottom, please just visit gtacc.ca or gtac.ca to register there. But I guess, thank you very much for attending on behalf of both Derek and I. As mentioned, we both have fairly unique, interesting names, so you can find us on LinkedIn if you have any questions or want to reach out. We really appreciate your time. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Have a great day.